great, but it looks like that looks really good, but it looks like it's a bit great. It's the same design.
We've got those, but it's not hooked up to the PA, and they can't make it work. So it's how you hold stuff at the same time. So they have a mic stand. Yeah, because otherwise people can't hold their things. Okay, thank you very much. We'd like to make a start. Okay. Welcome everybody, and thanks very much for coming all this way. Can everybody see the screen? Yes, good. Okay, we're going to kick off this morning. We've got masses to get through. The first thing to say is welcome and thank you all for coming to this really lovely venue. And we're going to whiz through a bit of housekeeping. My name's Alison Tickell. I am the director of Julie's Bicycle. We're going to do a little bit about how the day's going to run and some housekeeping, and then we're going to crack it off with some talks. So the first thing just to say is this session is being live streamed. So welcome to any online viewers. And if anybody doesn't want to be filmed, just let us know. Questions will be taken from Twitter in the discussion. Use our hashtag sustaining creativity to ask questions, and we'll pick up some of those questions during the panel. And in addition to our speakers and workshops, it's worth knowing that we've got two graduates from Sustain RCA, which is the sustainability programme from the Royal College of Arts, and they really are doing some incredible stuff. And we've got two speakers, two artists who are showing upstairs. One's in the library space on the mezzanine. They're both in the library space, and they'll tell us a little bit about their work a bit later. So that's all there is to say, except for the loos are just... You come out of that door and you turn left and the loos are there. This morning we're going to have presentations from 4 of our key speakers, and then there will be a panel discussion at the end. This afternoon there's a series of workshops, and if you haven't signed up to workshops, I'll remind you at the end of the morning, but please do so now to make sure that you get a space. So I'm just going to kick off now. I'm going to do a quick presentation on, first of all, why we're here, what's the relevance of this. Then we're going to look a little bit at a survey that Julie's Bicycle has completed, and we have the results. It's not going to be formally launched until tomorrow, but you can have a sneak preview because it's really interesting. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the Sustaining Creativity programme in the round. So the first thing I want to do is just to remind us about sustainability rather than creativity. And one of the best definitions, I think, of sustainability is that it's a balanced, mutually beneficial relationship with our socio-ecological context. That's us and the planet. So I just wanted to say a little bit, before we go off into inspiration and energy, a little bit about why this is so critical. On the 14th of March of this year, NASA, a NASA-funded study, predicted by the United States National Science Foundation, it predicted the collapse of civilization within decades. Now, this is an organization that really isn't known for its hyperbole. It's quite a conservative organization. And they are predicting really a really serious consequence of not dealing with climate change. And indeed, in our own country, a couple of years ago, the UK Government Office for Science predicted a perfect storm by 2030 as a consequence of food shortages, of energy shortages, and the consequences of fossil fuels, of water, and of climate and extreme weather events. So if we just look, these are average surface temperature, population, carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, concentration, and the loss of tropical rainforest and woodland. That is 1750 to 1800 to 1850. Then, at about 1900, a whole pile of new indices of planetary boundaries came into play. Water use, paper consumption, motor vehicles, species extinctions, foreign investment, ozone depletion, fisheries exploitation. And that started at the turn of the 20th century, and that's where we are now. So you'll see that there is an absurd rise in exploitation and in environmental impacts. This is 1700, and that top graph now is about the turn of the 21st century. And quite simply, our planet just cannot cope. It cannot cope with that scale of impact, and it's absurd, absolutely absurd to think that it can. But it is often in the darkest skies that we see the brightest stars. And we are, as a consequence of all of this, we are actually in a dark moment. And it's absolutely critical that we start to look and see where those brighter stars are and shine in them. And we have the great good fortune in this room of being absolutely part of the solution if we choose to be, the creative industries. The creative industries are absolutely pivotal in how we deal with this perfect storm. But we need to start doing it now. We have huge leverage, and I think one of the things that we need to do is to recognise it. And some of the things that we found from our survey is that we're not quite there yet. We are, in many ways, we are the custodians of culture. We are critical to human interaction and how we design ourselves out of it. As Maya Angelou said, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. Creativity is fundamentally our most renewable resource, and we absolutely need to start using it. I just wanted to have a quick reminder of who the creative industries are. We're starting with design. I think design is becoming so pivotal, and we're going to hear a bit more about design later. It is up to design to design ourselves into a different way of being and a different relationship that we have with the material world. But it includes advertising. You could argue that advertising is one of the sectors that has got us into this massive consumer mess. Now advertising can help us to get it out. Media and broadcast, we have absolutely extraordinary reach. Film, similarly, fashion, everybody is a custodian of fashion. There's been a revolution going on in the fashion industry around sustainability now. Games, how do we feel? How do we play our way through into sustainability? Music, which is where Julie's Bicycle started, it really does go straight into how we feel about ourselves and communicates on a vast global platform, creating communities of huge size. performing arts, which is theatre, it's combined arts, it's all those things that we're going to see working through themes and developing new practice around sustainability, the visual arts, and of course museums and heritage. All of these industries together, I think, have a quite extraordinary reach into the human imagination. They plunge us into completely different ways of being. What do? They are the catalyst for innovation. They will open up brand new ways of innovating. They're transforming market realities because at the moment, sustainability is becoming increasingly interesting to the market, and it's absolutely up to us to drive a green market. Design constraints around the constraints of natural resources they're not necessarily constraints. They're actually allowing for entirely new and better adapted products and services in response to this great big challenge. They're a source of competitive advantage. The UK has got a really vibrant creative sector. The emergent economy is undoubtedly going to be a sustainable economy. It really does need to build in natural constraints around our materials and how we use it. We really could be driving a green market and take on that competitive advantage. At the moment we haven't. It's coming from other places, such as Germany and Japan. We need to get on the front foot on this. The creative industries bring communities together. They bring communities together unlike almost any other industry. They're often unseen, but they are deeply felt and deeply shared. How do we leverage the power of these communities around creativity to think and see differently? And finally, they plunge us into other ways of seeing. And I think the great challenge of the sustainability movement is that it's not actually just about energy, it's not about technologies, it's not about waste or any of these things. It's actually about a different way of seeing the world and our relationship to it. It's that different way of being in a socio-ecological context. And the arts and creative industries do that better than anything else. In short, the creative industries and why they are absolutely critical now, more so, I would argue, forcefully than any other economic sector on the planet, they do have the potential to transform both our individual and our collective way of being. Sustainability really needs us. So, in the context of this challenge, and I think many of you will recognise that in terms of the public discourse, sustainability and climate change have gone down the agenda, not up. Julie's Bicycle has started to, started to develop a programme which we've called Sustaining Creativity over the next year, which is trying to do something with a little bit more oomph than we have done in the past. Our aim is to accelerate a holistic rethink of how the creative economy and community responds to climate change and environmental sustainability. While there are some great examples of fantastic practice, we are absolutely not there yet, and it's incumbent upon all of us to speed up. It's our attempt really to understand why cultural value, which is one of our themes, is measured on scales that don't weigh natural capital, don't factor in the risks of inaction around climate change particularly, and they do not celebrate creative invention around a sustainable future. Why are we not measuring value, which is a conversation everybody's having at the moment, factoring in as perhaps our key metric sustainability, both understanding risks and also understanding opportunities? What would our creative industries look like en masse if they did? Where would they find their inspiration? And how would they be made and valued? Would it make any difference? And I think it would make a huge difference. So, the case for making creativity is being made very vociferously at the moment. It's on balance sheets and how it spirals out into communities, into the workforce economy, and into general feelings of well-being. And I think this is a very familiar discourse that we're surrounded by at the moment. Not a week goes by when we don't have some conversation or some editorial on culture, particularly, and value. And in the creative industries, the investment value equation assumes that art particularly can be a force for good. It assumes so. Because I think we do know that it plunges us into other realms of complexity, of identity, of community, of joy, and of empathy. And hence, there is the assumption that it can solve other entrenched problems, such as poverty, we're very used to that, unemployability and skills, we're used to that. Well, are we used to it in the context of climate change? We're not ready there, we're not ready yet. But perhaps it has a role to play. It works wonderfully well. I think most of us know that the creative industries are net generators of value flows. Curiously, though, value really is not related to the environment, and Julie's bicycle is absolutely going to interrupt this conversation, and this is the first of those interruptions. We have data, lots of it, and at the time of writing there are nearly 2,000 registered creative industry tool users, which are basically carbon snapshots. But what our industry green tools don't do is they don't capture the hearts and the minds, the collective heart of the creative and cultural industries. And that's why Julie's Bicycle and Burns Owen's partnership designed a survey, which I'm just going to quickly run you through, at the end of last year, which was just to get a temperature to where the creative industries feel, not what they're doing, so much as how are they feeling about sustainability and climate change, recognizing that unless you bring in some of this feel, people are not going to move on it. So we are launching this tomorrow, but I'll just quickly take you through where we are with it. So the survey scope, we worked with the number of respondents represent an audience of around 70 million, a turnover of over $1 billion. It's restricted to those areas in which we had critical mass of respondents. So that's combined arts, dance, literature, museums, music, theatre and visual arts. We do want to extend that out for the next survey. It's England, Scotland and Wales, and it's a very mixed group of organisations, big, small, big opera companies, tiny little offices, touring, festivals, etc. And I just want to quickly go through some of the findings. 55% of the respondents have experienced financial benefits as a consequence of acting on sustainability and climate change. That's over half have already experienced benefits, and most people have only been doing this for 1 or 2 years. Oops, sorry. 40% have already experienced benefits to their reputation. Now, in a very competitive world, that's a very significant number. And 62% have said that environmental sustainability will become increasingly important to their business, and virtually everyone believe that it's relevant. On organisational change, we found that organisations that are more engaged are much more aware of the drivers, and that puts them at a competitive advantage. They're aware of the gains, financial and reputational, also compliancy. They're aware of risks, both opportunities and threats, and that those that are more aware obviously gain much more. Interestingly, feeling challenged doesn't inhibit your capacity to benefit from it. And there is no single overwhelming challenge, although time was cited again and again. And for me, that was an indication that people are not prioritising this. You make time for things that matter. We found that there are about 65 leading organisations. That's about 19%. We want that to be 100%. 19. We've done a piece of work with the Arts Council where we identify, working very specifically with their cohort. The Arts Council in England has made environmental reporting a funding requirement, as well as having an environmental policy and an action plan in place. It is no surprise, they've done that for 1 year and we're to the second year. It's no surprise that those organisations who are engaged in that as a funding requirement are the leading organisations, overwhelmingly. So 63% of that cohort who are subject to environmental reporting are in that leadership cohort. Organisations with public funding tend to do a bit more, and I think that's something to do with public contracts, that publicly funded organisations are more used to being publicly accountable. Staff commitment is where it's really happening. Leadership is coming from the middle. That's really important. Leadership is not coming from the top. The highest number of leading organisations, interestingly, are in the northeast of England. They're not in London or the southeast. The highest number is in the northeast. There's some really fantastic clusters, actually, who've come together around particularly Newcastle and Newcastle Gateshead, who are really motoring on sustainability and climate change. And that's something about how you collect communities around this. This is really important. Climate impacts and risk, governance and audience demand are weak drivers for change. Climate impacts and risks and governance, two very, very closely connected issues, are weak drivers for change, and yet financial benefits and reputational benefits have already been achieved. So there's an interesting disjunct between governance and between thinking about and how you feel about sustainability. The theatre and visual arts are front runners. They're doing the most. But 15% and 9% respectively, 15% of theatre and 9% of visual arts think that they're not doing very much. So that's very interesting. That's something about how they perceive themselves. Literature is doing the least and considers sustainability as the least relevant, and that tells us that the more the nature of the challenge is understood, the smaller achievements appear to be. And that's a really important perception for leadership. We ask people for visions. There is no shortage of vision. I'm just going to whiz you through this because a lot of this will be picked up during the day. These are some of the phrases that we got. And all of these that I'm giving you were provided by at least 5 different responses. So, leading on sustainable thinking and practice, leveraging cultural leadership for global change, collaborating with others for solutions, changing attitudes and behaviours, communicating with audiences and consumers, inspiring audiences and consumers, leading the green economy, developing and making creative work, reducing carbon and increasing renewables, managing materials effectively, including zero waste to landfill, capital and future-proofing, low carbon travel, and supporting policy frameworks and legislation. There's no shortage of vision. But the creative community is not yet convinced of the business case and therefore is not recognising the myriad opportunities that sustainability presents. The myriad opportunities. It is also the only way to go. So unless we recognise them, we're working using obsolete business models. So our programme that we're developing over the next year, called Sustaining Creativity, I love that picture. Which is why I chose it. It's got nothing to do with sustaining creativity. It's just very nice. It's based on this proposition that culture in its broad sense, which is how we think, how we feel, how we do as societies and as communities, not culture in the heritage sense. Culture, we need a wholesale rethinking of culture. We need to rethink who we are in relation to one another and in relation to the planet as a whole. So what do we have to do with that? Well, creativity's got everything to do with that. As I hope I've argued, creativity is shaping culture. It is leading how we express culture in every way. So Julie's Bicycle launched this programme in November. Some of you were there. And what we identified with that group is that there are 2 critical emergent economies that will prescribe how the creative sector works. One is the digital economy, and the other is the so-called circular economy. I'm not going to talk too much about these because we've got experts in the room who will do just that. But these are 2 economies that the creative industries are subject to. too. And so the sooner we get our heads around it and how sustainability impacts upon it, how it prescribes those economies, the better. The second two areas are value and values. At the moment, as I also hope I've argued, that value and values are not reflecting sufficiently sustainability, either in terms of its negative impacts nor in terms of its positive impacts. And under the way that we value is a set of values. Do we care? Do we care about the planet, about our future, and about the people around us and the ecosystem that support us? We need to answer that question. And at the top, the other thing is leadership. So at the moment, the creative industries like to assume that they're in a leadership position, and I would like to challenge that notion. I think there are some great leaders, but not by far not enough. So we need to start to understand what leadership needs to look like, and we need to get cracking. So over the following year, all of these themes are going to be discussed both practically and also we're going to be blogging, and we're going to have conversations and events around them. So, and by the end of the year, we hope we're going to have an online publication which will just take everybody through the journey that we're going to go through, and hopefully we'll get some conclusions about what we might do now. So very briefly, to summarise those, in the autumn we're running a programme called The Wasteland with the Great Recovery, and that is around it's about our recycling centres. I'm going to leave Nat to talk about that. We're doing a piece with Scenery Salvage called Salvage to Salvation, which is we're going to go to a takedown place to take down a set and see what happens to that. And we're going to do some work on e-waste with the Great Recovery as well. We're looking at value with John Holden and John Kiefer, who are here today, are going to talk about it. We're going to have a discussion and a session at the Liverpool Everyman and the Shed in the National Theatre, and we will have at least one other to be arranged, probably early spring. And we're going to be looking at digital, and we're doing a digital lab with the Watershed. Again, I'm going to leave the Watershed to talk about that. And we're also going to be looking at digital impacts. This is an ongoing programme. These are the first events that we've worked out, and it will continue to add to them. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you for listening. But I would like now to introduce Tom Campbell. Tom he leads the Creative Industries Knowledge Transfer Network Technology Strategy Board, who are partly supporting this and have actually been very supportive of this programme. Tom's a cultural manager and economic development consultant, previously head of creative industries at the London Development Agency, and chair of the Regional Development Agency Creative Industries Network. And more recently, Tom oversaw the drafting, consultation and production of the Mayor's Cultural Strategy, which was great, mentioned sustainability. So without more ado, I'll leave Tom.
Thanks. Do you want me to use the mic, yeah?
Sorry.
But I'm going to jump on the stage because I haven't got a presentation. Thanks, everyone. I'm afraid I'm from the... I'm afraid that my presentation isn't going to be anything like as inspiring and rich and enjoyable as ours. So here we go. I'm Tom Campbell from the KTN, which is the kind of networking industry engagement arm of the Technology Strategy Board. And I'm just going to do some quite dull stuff here. How many people here know about the Technology Strategy Board? About half the room. Just quickly then, for those that don't know, or those that do know and want to know a bit more, Technology Strategy Board is the government's national agency for innovation. It spends about £400 million a year in R&D for businesses. To that extent, it works a bit like a research council, like the Medical Research Council or the AHRC. In fact, it's actually co-located with them in Swindon, and it gets all its money from BIS. Interestingly, or perhaps not that interestingly, it was set up by the previous government in about 2008, and I would say it's probably one of the quangos that has changed the least from New Labour to the coalition government. It's pretty much still does what it did 6 or 7 years ago when Gordon Brown set it up. So it's got strong kind of political backing. So it's one of the few public organisations I've worked for that I think will probably still be here in 2 or 3 years. And in terms of what it does, just to be clear, it gives out R&D grants, and it does those very much to businesses, for businesses to innovate and grow. And it really, in so doing, it's tended to focus on sectors such as energy, aviation. Our chief exec is I think he's an aviation engineer by background. Lots of biotech, lots of healthcare. A lot of the kinds of things it funds are kind of spin-outs from universities, so very high-tech businesses that perhaps have come out of academic research, leading to sort of incubation and spin-off and kind of growth. But within that, and creative industries is a relatively new thing in terms of how much it's engaged, and I'll come on to this at the end. It hasn't really, both the TSB and the KTN are part of it, hasn't really done a huge amount with the creative industries up until now, and that's something I'm really hoping we can do more about. The good news about the TSB, I think, is that actually it's got, I think, really good leadership in terms of sustainability, which is really welcoming. The head of sustainability within the Technology Strategy Board, a guy called Mike Pitts, has met many times with Al, with Julie's Bicycle, is a really gets it. Like a lot of people within the Technology Strategy Board, he's very much rooted in it, and he has a background very much in in his case, kind of in biochemistry, environmental science. That's kind of typical of the people that work there. But he really does get the broader stuff around sustainability, around social sustainability. And he understands that the creative industries, although, as he tells me, it has quite a relatively small kind of environmental impact, he sees it as having real potential in terms of changing behaviours, consumer trends, empathy, resonating, and kind of having an impact in terms of a wider impact over and above the size of the sector itself. We have a sustainability policy. We don't have a strategy, but we have a policy, and we have a definition of sustainability, which isn't anything like as good as Julie's Bicycle, but it is a kind of BIS approved definition, which is something to do with economic growth. Which meets the needs of the present generation without an end. Oh, go for it. Oh, sorry. BIS is the government. No, quite right. And any questions, do shout out. That's the government department for business, innovation, and skills that gives us our money and funds the universities. So the minister is Vince Cable. So we get all our money from central government in that way. No, please do fire out any questions you like. I'll just start saying our definition of sustainability, which is a kind of BIS-approved one, is a sort of narrower, more passive definition of sustainability. It's kind of it's economic growth in such a way that the present needs of the generation do not harm the future generation needs. So we can work with that. Could be better. Along with sustainability, we also have so sustainability this is quite important, sort of important. It's a cross-cutting theme that sort of impacts and is meant to inform all our policies, but also it's a program. So we actually invest quite a lot in R&D around sustainability. Up until now, though, I'd say that almost all of that has been on resource efficiency, rather than anything rather than kind of wider stuff. So far, and again, I mean, this is why I'm really keen to come here to meet people like you, because we can scope up and work new competitions and funding programs. But so far, if you were to talk to most people in the TSB or BIS about what have you done around sustainability, the programs and answers you'd get would almost always be around resource efficiency. But still, that's important. And as well as our programs and our policies, we have a toolkit called the Horizons. Horizon 2020. Horizons, it's called, which I think you're going to find out more about this afternoon, which Forum for the Future helped develop. And this is a kind of tool we like to use in terms of getting businesses and applicants to think about sustainability and to think about the kinds of issues that are impacting on them. So we've got, I think, quite a good commitment to sustainability. However, and this is, I think, something I'd like to explore a bit further in the discussion and in the workshops and the panel discussions, I do need to reiterate that the TSB is very much an agency for innovating and for investing in innovation and business growth. So our focus on sustainability is very much in as far as it will support businesses to grow and increase GDP. And it's certainly in that sense it's not a holistic. It's quite a rigid, quite a government-like emphasis. So almost everything we fund, every application we fund, a business would need to show how by getting receipt of TSB funds, it will improve its profit margins. Now, it could do that by becoming more efficient and reducing its costs, or by increasing sales. But it would ultimately, any funding we give in terms of sustainability would need to have that kind of commercial impact. People like Matt Ridley are very influential, and our chief exec often cites him in terms of his speeches. So it's just to give you a sense of where we're coming from. And we very much like to see scale in terms of the kinds of things we fund and we work with. So the programs we do, the projects we work with are very much kind of like, we want to see major increases in exports, employment, business growth. Those are the kinds of metrics that we ourselves are assessed on by BIS. So you can see how, although not incompatible with sustainability, I think there are at least some interesting tensions there to which the extent you can really grow a sustainable economy, which we all want, while at the same time having, I think, quite an aggressive emphasis on business and commercial growth. But maybe we can discuss that. I think the key thing, and the kind of final thing I'd want to say, is we really do need to do more around creative industries. There's a real willingness there within the TSB and within the KTN. A lot of our work is around digital economy and design, and my colleague Beatrice here is going to talk about that in a bit. But so far, I think one of my disappointments has been how little we've actually done with this sector. We ran a competition at the end of last year, which was applying circular economy principles to supply chains. And at the KTN we were involved in helping to support that, and it was a bit of a disappointment that of the 10 funding awards, each one worth £500,000, only one went to a creative industries business, and that was Nike. It was a good project. It was Nike in partnership with London College of Fashion, doing some work around how they can reduce the costs and the resources of their kind of manufacturing supply chain. But you can see the kinds of things we fund, but also the limits in terms of how far we've really been able to get beyond that. So what's really good is in the KTN, in my role, I'm tasked with coming out, dealing with organisations like Julie's Bicycle, finding out what's going on, bringing intelligence back to the TSB, and hopefully scoping some future competitions so that in a year's time, perhaps, I'll be here presenting about a new funding competition, considerable funds, in which organisations like yourselves have been critical in terms of shaping them, creating them, and then getting money out to more creative businesses to help do what they do best. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Tom. Well, there's a challenge. I'm sure most of us will be quite interested in that. So that was Tom. We're now going to ask John Holden to come up and say a little bit about one of our themes, which is value and values. I think there's been already some interesting issues raised by Tom. John is an associate of the independent UK think tank Demos. I don't know if any of you have come across it, but it has done some really, really interesting work over the last 20 years or so. He's also a visiting professor at City University and has worked across the cultural sector. There's very few bits of the cultural sector that John doesn't know an awful lot about, and has some really incredible insights around them. He's addressed issues of cultural policy, cultural and international relations, leadership, creative industries, cultural value, and he's working right across the piece, not just in the UK, but internationally too. He's also, crucially, he's working on value with the AHRC, Arts and Humanities Research Council, and John Kiefer, his colleague, are going to be working with us on our value strand. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Ali. Good morning, everybody. Hello. Well, Ali started off with NASA, so I thought I might start off with NASA as well. When you put a rocket into space, and you're sitting on top of it, there's not a lot you can do about it. You've got hundreds of gallons of fuel, and off you go into the sky. But when NASA started putting people up into space, it decided that they should be pilots. Not that they could do anything, but it would be kind of reassuring for the public to know that somebody was in charge of something. And pilots traditionally had always taken cameras with them when they flew to capture anything that might happen that was odd. NASA disapproved of this massively because, as you can imagine, in space cameras fly around and they can damage all the kind of equipment. But the astronauts insisted, and one day one of them put his camera up to the window and took that very, very famous picture of the whole Earth from space. And I've been very interested in that picture for many years, and I did an MA dissertation on it when I was 20 years ago now. And what I discovered was that that one piece of material culture, that cultural artifact, was looked at in radically different ways by different people, depending on the kind of worldviews that they brought to it. And I want to mention this because it resonates so much with what Ali was saying about the moral framework, the value system, the baggage of your life that you bring to these kinds of issues around culture and the environment that we're talking about. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes looking at this space where ideas, activism, politics meets culture, meets the environment. Some of the ways in which that image was interpreted. One way is a kind of hegemonic Western view of one world. This is one world, and the world should look like the way it looks here in America. That's one interpretation. Another thing about the image was that there was a hippie guy called Stuart Brand going around the campuses of the United States with a badge saying, "Why haven't we seen a picture of the whole Earth yet?" And he was a keen environmentalist and then brought out the Whole Earth catalogue as a result. What I expected to find when I started investigating this image that after its publication there would be an upsurge in interest in environmentalism. And indeed that proved to be the case. The membership of Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace absolutely rocketed. What I didn't expect, which was kind of interesting, was that there was not a unified environmentalist approach to this image at all. Some people within the environmental movement saw the solutions to the environmental problems of the day as technocratic. And they accepted this image as a recruiting sergeant and as a means of persuading people that technical answers could be achieved. There was a whole other part of the environmental movement of deep ecologists, Buddha ecologists and so forth, who completely rejected the image as being masculine, technocratic, semi-fascistic, and that actually the answer to the environmental problems was not in technological fixes, but it was in here and it was in here. And that was the route that they chose to follow. So, we could talk all day on this subject, and I hope we will talk about it a lot more in the workshops this afternoon. But I just wanted to raise some of the interesting ways in which I think culture and the environment riff off each other and either have correspondences or disagreements. The first thing is around language, because these are both difficult words. I suspect everybody in this room has a slightly different definition going on in their head of what I mean by the word culture, or what Ali means by the word the environment. We all bring a set of understandings, and we need to surface those and talk about those and see what we think they are. But as words, they are both sort of overarching, framing concepts. We understand the world through them, which is why it's important that we get our meanings sorted out. They are both manifested in real things, in real events, in materiality, and yet they are deeply affected by our moral values and our intellectual understandings of what they are. One of the most interesting things, I think, about culture and the environment is how difficult politics finds both of these subjects. One reason is, I think, because of that fact that they are overarching, politics doesn't really know where to put culture and the environment. We have a ministry for culture, we have a ministry for the environment. But in both cases, the concerns of culture and the concerns of the environment go wildly across government. There's not a single department of government that isn't not only affected by both those two things, but isn't actively funding them and thinking about them and creating policies about them in some kind of way. You can't deal with the environment without dealing with planning. You can't deal with the environment without dealing with transport. You can't think about culture without, say, regimental museums, which are funded by the Department for Defence. You can't think about culture without the way that universities affect culture through graduates and through their own museums and so on and so forth. So politics finds it very, very, very difficult to have a taxonomy of both culture and the environment. I think politics also struggles with these two things because it has the wrong idea about the relationship of politics and culture and politics and the environment. Politics thinks it is in charge. We elect people to do things on our behalf. So it thinks that it delivers culture to us. You can read many, many local authority cultural plans around this country which talk about how we will deliver culture. The same is true in the environment. We will deliver these targets. But we all know in this room that that's not how culture and that's not how the environment work. Culture is what we collectively produce, what we, through our interactivity, produce. Government can help. It can provide platforms. It can provide infrastructure. It can provide money and expertise. But it doesn't make that culture for us. We make that culture. And it's absolutely the same with the environment. Governments can create rules and regulations about emissions, about where things can be built, and so on, but ultimately it's you and me who create the environment. Not that we control or live in, but that we are actively a part of. So government has this idea that it manages everything. We have to think of ourselves as cultural and environmental actors, if you like, as being part of those things, not separate from them. So what can the environment and culture learn from each other usefully, which I take to be part of the point of bringing these things together today? Well, one thing, as Ali mentioned, is the creativity and the energy and the innovation and the forward-lookingness that drives culture is something that the environment movement absolutely has to harness. It is a vital component of getting us to the right place. Fortunately, we have a wonderfully long history of the environment and culture sort of marching together, if you like. The 19th century reformers, Ruskin, William Morris, Octavia Hill, they were as concerned about clean air and green spaces as they were about beautiful places to live, about the creation of great books, about printing, about architecture, and all these kinds of things. So there's a very long tradition of these two things getting together that carries on today. I mean, you pick up a copy of Resurgence. It's Resurgence and the Ecologist now, isn't it? That magazine, and you'll find as many articles devoted to the arts and poetry and the visual arts as you will to environmental concerns. So that's a really good thing. The next thing is about language and principles, because I think the two things, culture and the environment, have an awful lot in common when it comes to trying to figure out a language to describe their own value. In both cases, this is another reason why governments struggle, we have both the measurable and the unmeasurable. We have the problem that governments only take notice of the bits that they can count and forget all the bits that are ineffable, spiritual, important to us in other ways that we know are vital, but which are not just hard to measure, but are actually quite hard to describe. So I think we have a lot to learn from each other, and this idea of natural capital, valuing culture economically, the idea of arts for art's sake and deep ecology, all sorts of things sort of riff off each other, I think, when it comes to the matter of language and measurement. Then, I think, almost finally, we need, both in culture and in the environmental world, to embrace the idea of democracy. This principle of individual action, individual creativity, coming together in collective action to create the new kind of world that we want. And what kind of a world should that look like? Well, going back as far as 1350, Lorenzetti, great Renaissance Italian painter, painted 2 frescoes on the walls of the town hall in Siena. They were called Good Government and Bad Government. Bad government is a vision of hell. There's smoke, there's pollution, there's destruction, there's violence. It's a grey and a black world. His idea of good governance is a green world. It has fields, it has people tending their gardens, it has water, it has clean air. But it also has, right down in the forefront, in the right-hand corner, a group of people dancing, making music, and singing. Which is why I think, even in our kind of newfangled digital age, we can look back on those pictures and see the importance of putting culture and the environment in the same box, and thinking of sustainability in both creative and ecological terms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was really, really super. Fantastic. Thank you. We're going to break shortly for coffee. But before we do that, I'd like to invite Sustain RCA alumni, Tanvi Kant. So Tanvi is going to tell us a little bit about the exhibit that she's brought for us to look at today.
Thank you. Just click. Oh, do I use that middle?
You don't have to.
Okay, that's fine. Work good for it. Hello, my name's Tanvi. This is an image of my view from my studio, my lovely studio in West Hampstead. I make jewellery from reclaimed textiles. This is some examples of my BA work, actually. But 5 years before I went to the Royal College of Art, I developed a practice around reusing dressmaking offcuts, sari fabrics sourced from family and friends, and families of tailors as well. So you can just see examples of necklaces that can be worn, wrapped around the body, that reference the original fabric as well. So my background is very much from an applied arts point of view. My degrees were both in 3D design as well as craft applied arts. So I learned a lot of hands-on techniques. My work at the moment, I work around designing collections through making. So I'll create a mood palette, a colour palette based on the season. Usually fashion industry works quite a way in advance for the next coming seasons, but I work within the season. So if it's autumn, I'll make autumnal colours, and if I'm in spring, I'll work with the spring colours. It just suits me better. So these are a few of my autumn, and this is my winter collection. Places that I exhibit normally are applied arts galleries, textile galleries. At the moment, I'm trying to learn a lot around business and structuring my production, so supplying independent boutiques. This is just up along the canal. Broadway Market has really lovely independent shops and boutiques. So a lady, Meryl Leslie, she's ex sort of Vogue, ID, Harper's stylist, and she set up her own boutique purely supplying sustainable designers, established and emerging. So I'm trying to expand, possibly training, working with social enterprises, working with disadvantaged groups of women, perhaps, to create some ranges, because I make everything myself. I do my photography, I do all the production, everything myself. And new lines, these images are a little bit poor, but I'm just going to show an example of 2 pieces with gemstones, precious gemstones. The one on the left there, on my left, your right, Fair Trade Gemstones. Kathy is an agent, a dealer in Hatton Garden, works with a company called Columbia Gemstones in America. And I have 10 peridot gemstones attached to that necklace, and they are from Arizona, Mesa Verde, which is extremely rare. To be able to actually to be able to explain and to say to your client, your customer, this is where this gemstone was mined, is incredible. And a lot of people in the industry will say it's absolutely impossible, we cannot do it. Marcia Lanyon is a really well-known supplier based in London, and she cannot explain. She doesn't know where her supplies come from. I've got really tiny little garnets and hematite beads hand-stitched onto that piece. The reason why I will still work with her is because she has given me a lot of time personally and through emails to explain, like, I'm really concerned about this, but I don't know how we can move forward. So this is an old model and a new model. And these are handmade samples that I did make at the Royal College of Art myself. If I costed them, they would be extortionate because I took so long. It's handmade silver triangles, hand-cut, hand-drilled, and textured, and they've been strung on string. And I've added those logos there. This is not fair trade silver, it is recycled silver, which isn't going to make much of an impact. But the fair trade legislation will do. This was also something that the mining industry said, it's not possible, it can't be done, but it actually has been done. And so I've actually given these pieces to a local manufacturer. Well, I'm from Leicester originally. In Melton Mowbray, there's a jewellery manufacturer who's growing. So this is great news for UK. And they have these pieces to develop them into production range for me, using fair trade silver and gold. So I'm inspired by indigenous cultures who spend a lot of time and effort making creative intricate craft, handmade objects. So I'm very much sticking to sort of making the hands-on sort of work, even though we have so much exciting developments in the digital age. And I'm just going to flick through really quickly, and there's a hand right in the middle, sorry, about the work that I did for the RCA. These are all different professional projects that I've done. Thank you. Teaching, sharing skills. This is in Athens, a group of crazy Greek ladies that I worked with for a week. India, British Council funded trips, Arts Council funded trips. Just all about expanding from making on my own to actually working with the public and creating workshops and events. This is at the Royal College, where I teamed up with other students as a ceramicist on the accordion. We would make a sort of a party, workshop, installation, and get people to interact with materials in a very sort of instinctive and curious and playful way. So this is TEDS 10. This is textile environmental design. They have a toolkit. These are amazing pointers, guidelines for designers. And out of the 10, these are the few that I actually think my practice really explores and looks at. So one aspect is the product, and the other side is the dematerialization, the service. So here, there's about 6 core values or needs, human needs. The product on this side, the jewellery, the physical material project, only meets 2 of those. The service, the exchange of ideas and skills, meets all of those. And so for my final MA project, I'm just going to end on this, was an installation of ephemeral materials, and that was my project space in the degree show at the Dyson building. This is at Battersea. So I had a table set out there, invited visitors to take off materials, sit with me, and we made. Some people would sit for an hour, some for a few minutes, create something, and surprisingly, a lot of people didn't have any creative sort of background at all, project managers and all sorts. And they left me little notes about the experience. And so I don't have that to show you because that was kind of invisible. And instead of an artist statement, I made a poster to invite people to take part in the event. And this is a few examples of what people made. And then again at the Sustain, a few months later, did the same project but in a different setup. And then sort of gate crashing private views and creating, this is an actor, he was really great, getting guys to make things as well. Fruits, these are really ephemeral materials. I really love that because this sort of spontaneity. So there's one aspect of my practice is very much about prolonging the life of material, and the other one is to celebrate the ephemeral qualities of them. And that's it. Thank you. And my work's upstairs as well.
Thank you very much, Tanvi. That was great. And they are lovely. They're upstairs on the mezzanine. We're going to have a 15-minute break now for coffee, and so you can get that outside, and then we'll start. We've got 2 more speakers after that. So go and get yourself some coffee and tea. Thank you. Oh. Okay, can we start again, please? Okay. So we're just going to crack on now because there's masses more to do. Just to quickly say what the rest of the day is going to be. We're going to have 2 talks now, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, followed by a panel. And so if you've got questions that you'd like to have raised, please make a note of them now. There will be a chance to talk about them together at the end of the morning. Then there will be lunch. Then we're doing the 3. You've got a choice of 4 workshops, which again, if you haven't signed up for, please do. And one thing I forgot to say is at the end of the day, we're having a dance performance here, which is a dance that I've seen. It's really gorgeous. So I would really thoroughly recommend that you hang on to see that, followed by drinks at the end of the day. I think we'll all need them by that time. So I just want to introduce our next speaker, Nat Hunter. Nat is one of the mistress minds behind the Great Recovery Project with the Royal Society of Arts, another of our partners over the next year, looking at specifically about circularity. So Nat, sorry, I'll say something about her. Nat, she's been a huge inspiration to me, actually. She's engaged lots of people in the design process. She is a designer, has a great career as a designer, where waste is literally being designed out of her processes. She's a experienced designer, regular contributor to the design community. She works with really big companies like D&AD. She's worked with Design Week, Creative Review, and for Graphic and Varum. And she's been on the board of trustees for D&AD since 2011, so she's got quite a lot of really useful influence. So over to you, Nat.
Thanks, Alison. Hello, everybody. Hope you had a nice coffee. Okay, so yeah, I'm Nat, as Alison just said, and I'm here to talk to you today just for 10 minutes or so about a project that we've been running for the past couple of years at the RSA, the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, where I'm currently working. So the project's called The Great Recovery, and actually we've heard from the KTN, it was funded by the Technology Strategy Board that was mentioned earlier, and in partnership with the Knowledge Transfer Networks. And it was my first foray into that world, actually, that world of interfacing with that kind of government funding. And the government wanted to invest in a programme like this, and because the drivers weren't emotional, they weren't, we should be doing something, we weren't allowed to use the words green or eco or sustainable, we weren't allowed to use any of those words. The drivers are very much financial, so this is all about moving us from a linear economy where we dig things up in Africa or wherever, we get them made in the Far East and then we buy them over here, and 90% of the consumer products that we buy are in landfill within 6 months. So there's this sense of moving us from that linear economy to a circular economy where all those materials are kept in the UK, on our islands, so that we maintain control over those materials, because China owns 97% of the rare earth metals, and that's a security risk. Also, it's about price. So if the price fluctuates and we know where our materials are, then from a government point of view, it's worth investigating. So this project was really much, Sophie Thomas and I, who've been running the project, we've got design backgrounds, and we are designers, and this was really about the role of design in moving us from this linear economy to a circular economy. So, everything is designed, everything is made. In this instance here, we're mostly talking about the kind of things we buy as consumers. So, if you buy a kettle, a pair of shoes, a TV, that's been designed by somebody. But it's probably been designed by somebody to fly off the shelves, to make you want it. It probably hasn't been designed to think about its entire product life cycle. And that's the kind of shift that we've been trying to work out how to make it happen. But we worked out that designers were only part of the much larger picture. So on this wheel, which looks a bit vague here, but basically hasn't come out very well, that missing one there says brands, companies, consumers, users, design, academics, investors, policymakers, resource management, material experts, manufacturers. Basically, everyone plays a part. So the designers get commissioned by someone to make something. We play our part as consumers in buying things. The material scientists play a part. If you think about the life cycle of an object, then there's a hell of a lot of people who need to come together. And normally people work in silos, and normally people just work in their knowledge specialisms. So this project has been very much about seeing what happens if you take people from all these different areas that are involved in the making of our stuff, and you take them out of their normal environment, out of their offices, wherever they work, and change their relationship to space completely. So we've been touring the country, going around where objects end up. So where TVs end up, and whether they're crushed or taken apart by a social enterprise, or whether textiles are taken apart or reprocessed and sent to Eastern Europe or Africa. There's a hell of a lot of kind of creative, interesting places where people are dealing with waste and making very viable businesses from that, which is also very interesting. So taking all these different people to these spaces, making them wear hard hats and safety glasses, and then we've been taking objects off the rubbish pile. So this is actually a washing machine, which is quite difficult to take apart. It takes a few people, quite a lot of heavy tools, and there's something about the act of getting out of your normal space, working with people that you don't normally work with. So a designer sitting next to a material scientist, next to a policy maker, taking apart a washing machine, taking apart a mobile phone. And there's something about that process that changes the way that you're thinking about the problem. And we found that it kind of opens people's minds and shifts mindsets and shifts assumptions, just that process of taking people out of their normal lives. And we're running workshops this afternoon that are kind of a mini taster of that, so please do sign up for those, and hope to see a lot of you there, and we'll go into that kind of thinking and the way to design ourselves out of this. We'll go into that this afternoon. So when we were doing the Great Recovery, we realised that we have all lost our relationship to making, fixing, repairing, and that there's now a kind of grassroots movement to change that, to shift that. So people are taking matters into their own hands, and there's fixing and repairing, and you'll probably all have heard of this kind of make space, fab lab, hack space world where there's hundreds opening up every year all the way around the world. And this is one called MacLab in Glasgow that I'm particularly fond of, because they've got a very creative culture mixed in with the technical culture, learning about 3D printers and laser cutters and all this kind of new technology, but they bring a real kind of design thinking into this space. And this world has an ability to completely change our relationships to objects. So instead of buying a chair from IKEA, if you need a table or a chair from IKEA for this weekend, you might just go down IKEA and buy one. In a couple of years' time, when you're signed up to your local Makespace, you might actually download an open design from the internet for a table or chair, make sure that it's exactly right for you, and then go and make it very easily in your local Makespace. And that completely changes your relationship to the objects that you own, and you're much less likely to put them on the skip when you move house. So we're very interested in that world, and so we're starting a Great Recovery RSA Impact Hub in a new Fab Lab that's opening in London next month. down near Bank Station, so that's very exciting. And it's about an attitude as well. It's about this kind of this taking matters into your own hands, this kind of design thinking and hacking. It makes for a very resilient population, you know, because the whole idea is that you think, oh, I'm going to make something, and you try to make it, and maybe you fail, and maybe it doesn't work out quite right the first time, and the table leg's a bit short, but you're in a culture of kind of try again and using creativity to solve problems and to make things better, which is very exciting. So where we're at the moment is that we're bringing the people from that wheel together in this kind of space, and bringing together the sustainable thinking, the circular economy thinking, in with the making, repairing and fixing culture. And it's a bit of a kind of experiment, but it's very exciting. We'll see where that goes. I thought I'd show a couple of examples of some interesting circular economy stories, just to illustrate the kind of breadth of possibilities. This is a diagram from Renault. They've got a plant in, hang on, I always get this name wrong, Choisy-le-Roi. Sorry, apologies to any French speakers. So this is Renault's very kind of high-tech circular plant near Paris. And in the last Ellen MacArthur Foundation report, there's a very interesting story about what they've been doing. Sometimes the solutions are really quite simple. They're just about looking at the holistic picture of what you're trying to do, looking at everything that your organisation does, makes, and understanding the supply chain and the systems within that, and seeing where you can improve. So the story with Renault, I mean, there are many stories, but the story that I'm interested in is that they had a fluid, a kind of, let me just look at my notes, a cutting fluid, and the cutting fluid was causing them problems because they were trying to get down to zero waste, but this cutting fluid created a lot of waste. So they had a meeting with their supplier, the cutting fluid supplier, and they said, you know, what can we do? You know, we're trying to get down to zero waste, and there's a lot of, we're throwing a lot of this stuff away. And they changed the model. So they changed the model so that the cutting fluid supplier decided that they were going to lease the fluid to Renault instead of selling it. And then in leasing it, they could then take that fluid back and build systems to clean the fluid, reprocess it, and give it back to Renault. So it created a win-win situation. So the cutting fluid supplier got a lucrative deal with Renault. Renault completely, you know, reduced their waste by 90%, and Renault saved 20% in costs as well. You know, Alison was talking earlier about how actually when you start looking at the problem, you can often get a win-win where you're making an environmental benefit and a cost-saving benefit. And in our experience, that's almost always the case, which is, you know, a complete no-brainer for doing it. It takes quite a lot of effort, but when you do it, the rewards are really good. So the other story I was going to tell you was about the connected light bulb, which was one of the competition entries for a technologies strategy board sponsored competition that we ran last year. And the competition was for changing products to become circular. So this is by a company called the Agency of Design, and this is the concept. This isn't actually in production, but it's a very, very interesting concept. So it's called the connected light bulb. So if I want to buy an LED light bulb, and I go down to, I don't know, Rhiness or whatever, and I want to buy an LED light bulb, they're probably 10 quid, 20 quid, and I might not want to buy it because the technology is moving very fast. So in a year's time, it's probably brighter for half the price. So there's a kind of reluctance to buy at the very top end of the market. And actually what they're looking at is using the rise of, you know, the digital platforms, using the fact that we're all very digitally connected now, to move from a product model where I go and buy my light bulb and that's the end of my relationship with the light bulb company, to a service model where I lease my light bulb from the company. I'm in a service agreement with them. My overall light bulb costs are cheaper. My overall light bulb experience is better. This light bulb is designed so that only the core of the light bulb needs to be changed, and it's connected to my Wi-Fi. So the company knows when the core is about to fail, and the company can then send me a replacement core in the post, and I send the core back, which then is reprocessed. So there's a very nice loop, and again, a win-win-win, where actually it's better for me. I don't have to ever remember to buy a light bulb. and my overall cost is cheaper. It's a win for the environment because all the materials are kept in play and they're all recycled, and the light bulb is designed to never lose its materials. And it's a win for the light bulb manufacturer because they know their market and they understand their kind of order book going forward because they're leasing instead of making products. So that's pretty much all I have time for today, apart from to say that we're working with Julie's Bicycle. I think it was mentioned earlier. We're making several trips to. Got excited there. Move the microphone. Trips to various recycling centres, reuse places over the next 6 months or so, which is very exciting. And look forward to working with some of you, perhaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nat. It's interesting seeing just how much is going on elsewhere. So we'll be talking about that a bit on the panel, but this is a little quiet revolution that's taking place under our noses. It's really exciting. I'd like to just introduce our next speaker now, which is Beatrice Rogers, who's going to talk for 10 minutes or so around digital. So that is another of our themes that we're looking at over the next year. So thanks, Beatrice. I'll say a little bit about Beatrice, sorry. I keep on forgetting that bit. She leads the Design Special Interest Group's Design and Innovation Programme, again on behalf of the Technology Strategy Board. You can see how important this body is for driving innovation. It aims to support the earlier and better use of design in technology-enabled innovation. She's over 15 years' experience in capacity building, innovation and technology. It's really interesting talking to her just now about how wide her realm is and also how wide her interests are. And I think that's all I'll say, except she has worked quite a lot on digital inclusion, which of course in the context of value is a really interesting area. So thank you, Beatrice.
All right, I might put the microphone up here because unlike many of our esteemed politicians, I cannot talk without notes. So, right. So, I've got some top and tail slides on this that apparently the slides are going to be made available afterwards. And as Tom has given such a good introduction to the KTN and what it is, I don't feel I need to go over the fact that we are the UK's innovation network. I'm from the creative, digital and design part of the KTM. We do a lot of work across different organisations, as you can see. And one thing I did want to highlight is when the Technology Strategy Board talks about accelerating economic growth, as Tom said, it's the triple bottom line of people, profit and planet. So sustainable economic growth is a key part of that. One thing that the Technology Strategy Board did last year was to launch its creative industry strategy, and it quite a big step for the Technology Strategy Board in that it recognised the interaction between technology and content and collaboration between artists and science. And as we know, these have been very siloed sometimes within policy, and so it's brilliant that the Technology Strategy Board has recognised this. One thing within the Creative Economies programme was the cross-cutting themes, and it's actually about these cross-cutting themes that I'm going to be talking about today. So, as I said earlier, the design was established by the Technology Strategy Board to support the earlier and better use of design and innovation and bring together some of the people that are normally barricaded by these silos of designers, technologists and innovators. And why is design of interest to the Technology Strategy Board? Well, it recognises that design can support innovation. Design is not just about styling. Design can support innovation from concept to commercialisation, and especially if it is used, let's say, shift left early in the innovation process. And it can lead to better time and cost savings, intangibles that we were talking about earlier, it also can. One of the really important parts for the Technology Strategy Board is that it sees to an opportunity to improve the desirability, usability and feasibility of technology-enabled innovations. And so this is quite often in the past, technology innovations have been given the name of solutions looking for a problem, where it's actually kind of looking at solutions that meet a user need or a market need or meet a challenge. And the Technology Strategy Board sees that design can be supportive across the whole of its priority areas. And you can see resource efficiency is one of the cross-cutting priority areas of the Technology Strategy Board. So, design does not only support financial ROI, though. As this is from the Leading Business by Design by the Design Council report that came out earlier this year. And it can add value to any organisation through driving innovation, differentiating products and services, attracting customers. I think embodying a company's values, as well as impacting on people's behaviours. And design is increasingly being recognised as a tool to embed environmental sustainability and resource efficiency within product, service and systems innovation. So design delivers with intent. I think that's very important. Now, this is a slide from a great V&A exhibition where it celebrated British design over the last 60 years. And the UK continues to be a place where artistic talent and creativity are kind of heralded around the world, actually. And recently the EU did some mapping across Europe, and it looked at the design skills within the UK. This is the Danish design ladder. Many of you might know it, where it goes from no design, boo, to design as a styling, design as process, and then design as strategy. And we've been recognised at having skills right to the top of the ladder. However, understanding a need for design and having the skills to have it is one thing, but actually doing something about it can be harder. This is a kind of a piece of 60s research that still applied today about how people will take up a new idea or adopt a new service at different rates. So you have early adopters, mainstreams and laggards, and that's the kind of tipping point. So at the moment we have lots of people talking about design, but not everybody using it. So bringing into the context of what we were talking about earlier, what John Alison said earlier. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many of you will know it, but I just wanted to use it as a concept. So in life, there are hierarchies of needs. So we have values, we attribute worth to ways of being, which affects our behaviour and our decision making. So I haven't done the research that Julia's Bicycle has done, but so I'm not going to actually say what the hierarchy of sustainability needs will be, but we can surmise that resource efficiency, well-being, long-term viability, across all aspects of life are part of this. But unfortunately, there is a dichotomy between some of these things that we saw before, the surmised core tenets of sustainability, and the things that are valued and we prioritise today in our society and our economy. Short-term financial gain. Purchase therapy. Whoever's done purchase therapy? Which means change and disruption. Whoa! And I didn't do this in red because, change isn't necessarily bad. Change can be nice and pink, but it still can be shocking. So we need a change in mindset, behaviour and values across government sectors, organisations, individuals. I will get back to digital, so we need enabling policy framework that enables systems that support sustainability, that support us to have sustainable behaviour, that allows the behaviour in what we do upholds the values that we should have, or what we need to have in order to have a sustainable place. So with that in mind, data and digital. So, how can we use data and digital to help? So, actually, in many ways, many ways. And I was saying to Nat earlier, I do have a little bit of problem with data and digital services. Digital. It's just services that we enable by technology. So we need not to think about these as separate, but how these are part of the holistic whole. So, how can the creative industries help? So, we can help ourselves to be more sustainable. Energy management, physician, heal thyself. How are local authorities trying to support citizens do energy management? How can we learn from other places? But there's a lot that we can do to help ourselves be more sustainable. Creative industries helping other sectors. It's a T-shape. The skills that the creative industries have in thinking about things differently, in creating conversations, in showing what data can do. This is something that the creative industries help, as well as citizens. Supporting citizens. And the thing that needs to happen is that when developing these tools, is that we need to design in the motivation and ability to change. So all those thoughts before, data and digital need to have these things embedded with it. So I'm just going to show a few examples. We held a workshop last year before the data exploration competition that the Technology Strategy Board held. And we held a workshop looking at how data visualization can support other sectors or people to help explore or explain information, which is one of the key things we've been talking about here. How do we explore and explain information? This is something aside from Hal Bertram from ITO World. You see the top right-hand corner? That's actually a visualization of from a project from Loughborough University, which is called Loughborough Commute, and it shows how staff travel within the Loughborough University campus and to the campus. It actually enabled people to look at how they can do more sustainable travel, such as ride sharing, and from coinciding journeys. Actually, that one out of interest. This one here. That's the flight paths above London visualised. It's mad. They've created a space that doesn't exist through data visualisation. 2 minutes. Oh, brilliant. This is one about telling stories about data. So this is from Rebecca Conroy from Information is Beautiful. And normally when we're given facts and figures about, we're using up resources, they can be quite difficult for people to engage in. They've put this into the shape of a clock. And it shows if we keep using these resources, when the resources will run out. This is a project by Leonora Oppenheim from Creative Data, and she talks about taking complex information and turning it into a compelling narrative, and helping people actually get some emotional response to the data, and emotional responses, particularly to the environment. With this one, it's a project around Norfolk, where they engaged people on thinking around what was going to be the future of Norfolk around conservation, tourism and farming. And then they used it as an educational tool where 300 children actually created imaginative visions for the future of the landscape in Norfolk. And this one is another one about engaging people, about creating an opportunity for dialogue. This was an installation as part of a conversation about trees from Active Ingredient, an artist collective, and it helped people to visualise environmental data and our understanding of climate change by showing the CO2 levels over the last 70 years on these pieces of paper. And just to round up, just to finish off, there are so many ways, and I just put on a few ideas. Future cities, health and well-being, how can digital help that? Energy management, local authorities are trying to do an awful lot about how do you manage energy across their areas. Experience, we talked about learning by doing. People might have heard of the digital app, Zombie Run, where people get out there and do something. How can that be made with sustainability in mind? Media, we talked about how creative industry is a huge channel to people. I saw a meme going around Facebook about what the media has, UKIP, sleaze, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, what it should have, why the bees are dying, why the bats are dying, what are resources. How can these messages be communicated in good science? So supporting circular activity, conversations to actually get people thinking, because people won't act until they think, as well as health and sustainable food consumption, things like land management using satellite applications. There's a whole catapult dedicated to the exploitation of the use of satellite applications data and how we can make digital things out of that. So there's a lot to think about, and I'm around afterwards if you want to talk to me, and thank you very much.
Gosh. Okay. Thank you very much, Beatrice. And what we're going to do now is give you an opportunity to ask the panel some questions. So, Beatrice, you need to come back up. So does Nat, John, and Tom. We're going to be joined by John Kiefer, actually, who's working very closely with John Holden on the Values project. So I'm not going to sit. Can you get the off? Sure. Can you take that off? Yes. Okay. So, a bit like herding cows. Okay. So, I expect you'll agree that an awful lot has come up this morning, and it seems to me that actually I think we should ask you guys first of all to comment and bring up anything, but I just wanted to highlight what seems to have come up again and again is the so-called dichotomy between the state that we're in and the need to build an economy and GDP and all the usual metrics around GDP, and what sustainability is actually asking us that we do. And I'd like to challenge that that's a dichotomy. But before we start, I'd like to just throw this out to you before asking the panel. So does anybody have anything burning that they'd like to ask? Because we've done a lot of talking first. Are there any? Juhi?
Hi, thanks everyone. Fantastic. It's a question for Nat, actually. Hi Nat. I was just wondering, understanding that the model for moving from purchasing to leasing is quite a new one. Have there been any? Hi, hello. Have there been any examples of people being able to lease a product and then, move on to another product? Do you see what I'm saying? So basically, how do you end the relationship with the company that you're leasing from if you are fed up with the light bulb design?
I think that's a good question, and I don't have a full answer for you there. What's really interesting is that a lot of economists have looked at, and sustainability experts have looked at the pattern of everything and worked out on paper. And on paper, washing machines work out really well if you lease them. Light bulbs work out really well if you lease them. I used to, back in the day when I was at university, I used to lease a TV from Radio Rentals. Everyone did back then. And when you wanted to end it, you just ended it. But I suppose you've got to kind of say where's you've got to choose your ending point to create the right kind of value. But on a more simple level, like I don't own a car, I use Zipcar, and so I've moved. That's slightly different from leasing, but it's the same idea that I don't need the product of a car, I want the service of a car. And I don't buy cleaning products anymore. I use a service called Splosh, where they just like the light bulb, they send me these very concentrated refills in the post, and I put them in the bottles and fill it up, so it's saving on water costs. So maybe something like a light bulb is a hard thing to get your head around. You've almost got to work it out as a consumer, that if you're paying £1 a month for your light bulb, you want to make sure that you've paid for 20 months to get the value out of it or whatever. And actually, these kind of product to service models are just emerging. So I just heard last week that there's a Dutch company who have made a leasable washing machine now. So, and we have to kind of see as consumers how that feels, because it is a big shift. I think the question is bigger than you say. Actually, it's not just about when do you end, but it's like, how do I trust? It's all about designing for trust, actually. You've got to design, your service design has to be so flawless that you trust that you will always have light bulb, washing power, car, and that's something that the design industry needs to change and upskill better.
Just really quickly to come in on that, because I meant to say, Nat, I really enjoyed your presentation. That was brilliant. And the work that Great Recovery's done was not only supported by the Technology Strategy Board, but it's really informed a lot of our programmes and funding competitions. And as part of that, leasing has actually emerged as a really powerful new process and application to this. And something I should have mentioned is the Technology Strategy Board is a bit of a misnomer. In fact, many of us feel it's quite unfortunately named, in that it's not just technology innovations we fund, but also design innovation and also business model innovation. So the example of Renault that Nat mentioned is something that's very much the kind of thing that we at the TSB would like to get behind and fund. And indeed, in the recent competition I mentioned, the supply chain innovation program, which again came directly from the work of the Great Recovery, the project I mentioned, the one creative industries project I mentioned, which was Nike's, is again moving towards a leasing model. So and I can't say too much about it because it was their commercial application and everything, but essentially what they're looking to do is they're going to trial moving from selling running shirts to leasing them. So you get them back, they reprocess the textiles, and you get another shirt every month or so. So again, you can see the same kind of process and the same kind of innovation being used at work. What we'd love to see is more of that kind of that kind of thinking across the creative industries, music, publishing, film, whatever.
Great. So I think that there's some really obvious applications in the cultural industries around some of that new emerging shared economy. I know that there are some more questions. Can I just ask who's got questions at this point? How many there are? 1, 2, 3, lots. Can I just also, to bring in the value before we go on to those questions, I just wanted to quickly ask John and John if there are any comments that you might have, because it does strike me that there is some weaving to be done between the assumptions that sit underneath value and the values that we bring to those. And I just wanted, I know Beatrice touched on them quite largely, if there's any comments from either of you around how we stitch together some of this conversation so that it forms a coherent narrative, or perhaps we don't.
Well, I think values do kind of underpin the decisions that we make in life, and our motivations flow from those values. And there is a direct linkage, I think, between thinking that leasing a light bulb is a good idea and having care and concern for the planet and our neighbours. You can have the lease and the light bulb just based on short-term financial gain. But I don't think that's good enough in the long term. I don't think that will ultimately get us to where we need to be. Therefore, I do think it's important to have the discussion about values and when we're all talking to each other, to understand what point we are coming from, why we are doing these things that we are doing.
I think there's hello everybody. I feel like I've got vertigo up here actually. I think there's some particular problems in one bit of the cultural sector, which is the publicly funded sector. I think we don't get out enough, actually. We talk to ourselves a lot. And I think one of the things that came out very strongly is the need to actually learn from parallel sectors, to talk to people much more widely than we do. And I think that there's a certain kind of insularity which maybe has come from feeling that we're under attack from government or whatever else actually which has come out of that. So I think the notion that there are things that we can learn from other sectors is absolutely crucial.
Ditto. So should we take some more questions? Hugh, yeah?
Hi everybody, I'm Richard, and kind of transitioning from a theatre production manager into something, I guess, to do with a bit more education and sustainability with working with local communities. It's a potted background on me. I had a question about the leasing model, and the question is, do you guys think the leasing model encourages us to use more stuff? And the reason, I can see a shaking head already. The reason is, it makes me think of phone companies calling you every year to say, hey, do you want the latest? And I wonder if that leasing model would decrease our notion of value on what we have. So if you buy it, you might think, oh, I want to keep that going. This is it's not a fully formed question, so I don't necessarily believe this myself, but I wonder what you guys think.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you own
can we take two more questions and then we can do them at once? Hilary?
Hi, Hilary Jennings. We've heard quite a bit about the potential dichotomy between a sustainable approach and the need for growth, and whether that is a dichotomy. I'm interested to know whether anyone, because I'm always watching out for it, if there's any sign of discussion about a different approach than the growth model in either mainstream politics or in really big business. And I understand the financial imperative that's behind that, and how do we detach ourselves from that, and is there any real discussion about that going on that anyone knows about?
And any other questions? Should we take?
Thank you. My point was also linked to Richard's point. I just wanted to throw this out there, that there would have to be quite a great shift in what is quite a consumerist society that's obsessed with private ownership, for people to start leasing things on a big scale in their lives. And I think there might still be some negative connotations with hire purchase and that sort of thing. And I just think, how are you addressing the cultural views that people have around renting things, essentially?
I just wanted to have a point on the renting. On the leasing, it's quite interesting. I saw a jeans shop. There's a jeans shop in Soho that has a sort of a leasing process where you buy them, you wear them, you take them back, or you can choose to you lease them, and if you want to give them back, you give them back. If you want to purchase them and never lease again, you can do so. They've built in the kind of giving back bit into their business model. I'm very interested in this idea that leasing can maybe let us not value the things that we have. When I was growing up, most things were leased. Like washing machines were leased, TVs were leased. I don't think it was of value. I don't think we valued the things of any less. Actually, they were quite important things. We leased them because they were important and expensive. I think that maybe actually it's about our perception. It is about the perception of things rather than does that model lead to people less valuing per se. And if you look at renting, say for example in Germany or other countries where things are leased long term, where in the UK we have this thing about buying our houses. I do think it's about culture and value. It goes back to culture and values again. So you're right in terms of that there will have to be change about those, but I don't think that the two are intrinsically linked.
Well, all I was going to say is if anyone can change perceptions and lead to that kind of change in consumer attitudes, well then that's us, isn't it? It's the creative industries. That's what we're good at. And just to go back to that Nike project again, I mean, one of the reasons why we were so keen to fund it was because Nike, the power of Nike's brand and their marketing team, which have persuaded people around the world to spend far more money than they should have on all sorts of rubbish, and now going to be and good stuff, I'm sure, and now going to spend their time with us to try and persuade people that leasing is something that can be cool, that can be something that is something that consumers should do. So I think your question, will leasing work? I think it's very much an unknown, and let's see. But I think I'm pretty confident there are some very smart people out there that will be able to persuade us to do it.
No, go on. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go first.
Well, I want to deal with the growth point. So if you want to deal with leasing.
Okay. I think the elephant in the room about the growth economy is really interesting, and it's one that obviously is really difficult. And the leasing model is there's a kind of continuum of the things you might lease, and I think the other end of the continuum is the sharing economy, and the sharing economy is where it gets really interesting, and it's where it scares people who need the growth model. If you have something like Airbnb or tool sharing services or anything like that, again you're designing for trust, and that economy. So again, I use Airbnb, I go and stay in people's houses, and there's an enormous amount of trust there for them to be able to trust that transaction will be safe for all of us. But digital platforms and good design and good designs of companies that support those, does enable that trust. So that's kind of shows to me that I think that we can shift our mindset, because that's an enormous new idea that's only come in the past 4 or 5 years.
To deal with the growth issue, is anyone in government looking at this kind of thing and different sorts of models? The answer is very much yes. In the wake of the financial crisis in 2007-8, Sarkozy appointed a commission made up of 3 Nobel Prize winners, Joseph Stiglitz, Claude Fitoussi and Amartya Sen, to look at the idea of GDP plus, because suddenly, having run out of growth, it was decided that we had to find some other way of thinking about things. And they came to the conclusion that we did indeed need other measures, principally around well-being, but also around environmental issues and so forth, clean environment and whatnot, to measure our well-being. This has been embraced in parts of government right across Europe and indeed the United States. So there are people in the Cabinet Office looking at this. You'll find something called cultural well-being now is one of the principles of the National Policy Planning framework, though it's not defined, so nobody knows quite what it means. The Office for National Statistics is asking questions about well-being. I was part of a survey recently, and this wonderful discourse around the idea of well-being boiled down to, on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you today? And how happy was I yesterday? The bad news is that it really hasn't technically got anywhere within the Treasury yet. The Green Book and the Magenta Book both insist that decision-making is made on the basis of financial comparisons, which is why you have people struggling to put a figure on natural capital and all kinds of things which we know are important but which are very, very difficult to measure, and trying to squeeze things into issues of measurement that really don't fit. The same is true in culture. Whether the Treasury will move on to this some kind of broader measure of understanding the things that are important to people beyond mere financial measurement is an open question at the moment. The problem for a lot of us, I think, in both the cultural and environmental worlds, is that if we talk solely in terms of financial returns and financial measurement and GDP, we are immediately putting ourselves onto a territory which is A, unfamiliar, and B, kind of ceding the battle almost before it's fought. So I think we have to certainly embrace the idea that some things are measurable, to measure them as well as we possibly can, and to engage in that debate. But we also have to keep on asserting the fact that what this is about human beings, not money, at the end of the day.
Yes, just to add to that, and I think also, as we're working in a creative sector, we have to start thinking about ways of describing how the world could be different, actually, and actually saying, I did an away weekend with a group of organisations involved with arts organisations involved with environmental projects. And about halfway through the first day, we suddenly realised the problem wasn't people not understanding what these projects are about. The problem was capitalism, actually, which at that point we all had a drink and thought about how we could move on from that. But that's it, actually. There's a whole set of values that sit alongside not appreciating damage to the environment and so forth, which you have to confront as well. And the big P word comes up, which is politics as well. And I think we've lost the habit of being able to describe the world in a different kind of way as artists and as creative people, and we've got to do that again. Just to go back on the leasing thing very briefly as well, I mean, the classic example of where leasing has replaced ownership is in the music industry. I mean, the music industry has gone through. The music industry always gets everything wrong first, which is quite useful, really, in terms of how to approach things. And because there's now a very rapid movement towards people streaming music rather than loaning it. I mean, I think there are all kind of issues about quality and about people wanting metadata, actually, and so forth as well. But I mean, it's an inexorable move towards that. So I mean, it can happen within our world, I think.
Just Tom, and then I know there's a couple more questions.
Actually, the two Johns have answered it so brilliantly. I don't think I've got anything more to say than this, other than to echo. There's lots of really good work going on, particularly at the transnational level. The new UNESCO report on the creative economy is actually well worth reading. But certainly in our world, in the world of Treasury and BIS and Technology Strategy Board, lots of good work, lots of good projects, you've heard about them, but in terms of challenging values and kind of questioning the consumer society, those just aren't conversations that are taking place.
I know there's lots of questions. Can we have 3 more, and then we've got 5 minutes, so we'll have a rain check for lunch. The gentleman over there, the woman there, and the gentleman over there.
Andrew Ross from Global Garden, looking at the financing behind all of this. And I could start with a rhetorical question like, what has the EU ever done for us? And last month, it issued the EU Sustainability Reporting Directive, which requires all public listed companies to report on their entire supply chain sustainability on a global basis. Now, the model you've pointed to with Nike has been well established with Puma, and their environmental P&L is looking at their entire supply chain sustainability from end to end. And we've got well-established business models with Unilever, with Marks and Spencer, with Kingfisher and B&Q, who are making millions of pounds out of the sustainability inherent in their business operations, which is really difficult for them to get over to the public.
Yeah.
This is all dropped miles away from people's everyday thinking and behaviour. And in this context, I think TSB has got a really important role to play in enabling this financial connection with the city and the investors there who are absolutely concerned with these sustainability issues. It's in the day-to-day accountability of how they make share price valuations, and how that is brought to the attention of the public is now a driving question.
Yeah. Very good point.
Hi, my name's Jasmine. I'm a physicist and an artist, but my day job is, well, literally for the last 20-odd years, I've been working with kids and teachers in cross-curricular thinking, and I'm completely passionate about the whole idea of creativity. And in terms of a lot of the things that people have said on new perspectives, I'm now working with a lot of grown-ups, I'm working with businesses. They are incredibly resistant to change because they are grown-ups. One of the things I haven't really heard mentioned is education is very important in this, because teachers pass stuff to their kids and parents do. So I'm wondering if this can be addressed when they're younger, so that you don't have that resistant thinking later on in life.
Richard Campbell from the Design Business Association. We're talking, one of the things that our society runs on is the credit card economy, and credit cards drive consumerism. So I'm interested in any innovation in financial products which you've seen or interested in, which drive a different behaviour, so drive a behaviour which is a sustainable behaviour. So the source of money promotes sustainable behaviour rather than the current consumerism.
Okay, so 3 really interesting questions. I think the first 2 are reasonably related. One made a very well-made point about the fact that actually at the moment much of the business community is really doing some very unusually forward-thinking things, not least because it's incumbent upon them to look beyond the short-term funding cycle, and things like their carbon assets are looking very fragile at the moment. So we've got some extraordinary stretch leadership going on from within the business community, and it's very interesting in terms of the creative industries and indeed the cultural sector as to how we relate to that. Related to that is financial instruments and what might be developing around this issue there. And then a new area entirely, which is, I think, probably part of our responsibilities around education and training into a new economy. So who'd like to kick off on that? John and Beatrice.
I'd just like to talk about the first question, about business models. Actually, our sustainability community is working with RAP on a major, I can't remember how many million, £3 million project about how do you communicate these business models. I can't remember. Oh gosh.
It's the government funded, not exclusively the organisation that deals with waste.
I can't remember.
Sorry.
Waste
resources.
That's it.
Sorry. I learn lots of acronyms, know what they are, but don't know their names. And actually, it's quite interesting how you talk about how people find it difficult to communicate business models, where some people are using that as a key differentiator. For example, Marks and Spencer's has used it within its advertising and communications a lot. And it would be interesting to see if people chose to make it a differentiator within their marketing. But it is a circular thing. How do you it's like it's got to be top down, bottom up. There's got to be a push of this is good, this is something you want to do, whilst also engaging with people to explain, have that conversation about why you would want to buy into it, why you would want to change. So I think there's a lot of conversations that need to happen, because people tend not to act until they have processed the thinking.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting dynamic opening up in lots of parts of this conversation between permanence and change and between short-termism and long-termism. And there are so many practical issues in politics around headlines and election cycles versus long-term commitment to all sorts of policies beyond the environmental. There's lots of issues in the city between long-term investment in infrastructure and business models and short-termism with fund managers, portfolio churns, and all these kinds of issues. And again, media focus on them. And I think that's maybe one in the workshop this afternoon. This is one of the things we need to concentrate on: how you solve that dynamic between short-term urgency and long-term need.
Does anybody want to say anything?
Yeah, great.
Just to come back in on the question about education and children, I think it's my kind of one of my other roles is I'm chair of New Direction, which is the successor for Creative Partnerships in London. I think it's really difficult. I mean, what's happening with education is becoming in a way disaggregated. So all the subjects are being separated out from each other in a way that wasn't happening before. One thing I would say though is working with teachers is that they are desperate for good materials. And really compelling, well-designed, beautiful materials. And I think, there's a way of telling the story there. Downloadable lesson plans. I mean, there have been initiatives where people have made some very simple lesson plans around music, for instance, and they've just disappeared. People have downloaded thousands of them. So I think we can work and try and, I think crucially understand where teachers are coming from, what kind of pressures there are on them and so forth, and get some really compelling stuff out there. But it's getting harder to do that. I mean, thanks to Mr. Gove and his friends, to actually get anything that links up different subject areas and ideas together.
Just a follow-up point on that. Sort of skills is outside of the Technology Strategy Board's remit per se. But there is a competition going on at the moment that people might be interested in this area. It's Learning Technologies Designed for Impact. It's a fully funded feasibility study aimed at people working. It's not CR&D, a collaborative R&D, research and development program, but it is supporting people working in collaborations between educationists, designers, technologists to overcome some of the systemic issues around using digital and technology within the education, and it's for any kind of learning outcomes over the age of 5. So if people are interested in that area and have ideas, the Technology Strategy Board website, innovateuk.org, is that right? Oh, I think so. Has information on this competition, so it's a good one to look out for.
Is the time? Yeah, just pick up the first two questions a bit, Andrew and Richard. Really good point about the EU legislation and regulation, and a more general point. I think you're right. Some of these actually large corporations who I grew up hating are actually very good at this. You mentioned Nike. We've mentioned Marks and Spencers. Marks and Spencers, I should say, were another successful applicant in our recent supply chain innovation contest, and again we'll get £500,000 to further develop the work, which again sort of begs the question, kind of, come on guys, let's get the creative small and middling businesses to be involved. And on the specific issue of transactional kind of innovation, really interesting. As I said, and I'd love you to take this away, Technology Strategy Board, it's a really unhelpful name, it puts people off. We're really interested in design innovation and business model innovation, the same way that Nat's pioneered in terms of leasing. And if you've got some ideas about how you think we can scope a particular competition around changing consumer behaviour in a way which is also driving business growth and efficiencies and profitability, then we're always really interested to talk about working that up. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so there's another invitation. So there's two elephants in the cupboard that have been brought out. One is money and our incumbent system, and the other is behaviour, how we can change behaviours. And perhaps we can pick some of those up this afternoon. I think it's time that we wrapped up this morning. So if you have got questions, there will be opportunities. First of all, Julie's Bicycle is working on picking up ideas. Can I see a show of hands for JBers at the back? There's three, there's Paula, Julia and Lucy. If you have any questions or any comments, do talk to them or give them to them. And there are a few places around the building where you can contribute your thoughts and ideas on notice boards and post-it notes. I just wanted to mention something that we're doing. Julie's Bicycle is one of the pilots for a project run by Joe Hunter and David Micklin over there called 53 Million. The idea being 53 million artists. The idea being to understand and uncover the creativity in every member of it's only England, isn't it? England, yeah. So one of our responses to that is that we're going to pull together a bunch of patchworks, very simple craft project, and on each patchwork there is going to be some thoughts from everybody who contributes to this about themselves in relation to sustainability, in relation to environmental impacts, and your thoughts for the future. If anybody wants to be a part of that, and I'd love you to be, go and speak to somebody at the front desk. And if you haven't signed up for your afternoon workshops, can you talk to one of the team or visit the registration desk? I said that again. And we won't be reconvening in here before the workshops, which start at 2 o'clock. So make your way directly to your first workshop after lunch. And we've now got just over an hour for lunch. I'd like to thank all our speakers, some of whom will be appearing. For a really stimulating morning. So that's it. Thank you.